All conversation died the instant we stepped through the diner door. What should have been a warm small-town cafe on a cold night was suddenly as silent as a tomb. 40 pairs of eyes turned and locked onto my friend and me, unblinking. In the front booth, an elderly woman with wrinkled skin wore 2 black eye patches, one over each eye, yet somehow I knew she was staring straight at us. In a raspy whisper that cut through the silence, she asked, "What do you want here?" My heart pounded in my ears. This was supposed to be just a quick stop for dinner on our cross-country drive. We were 2 outsiders who had wandered off the highway looking for a meal and gas in a tiny, forgotten town. The streets outside were deserted, and an eerie stillness hung over the place even before we entered the diner. A peeling sign that read Pat's Diner creaked on one hinge outside. We hesitated at the threshold when we saw how dim and cramped it was inside, but hunger pushed us through the door. Now, under the harsh gaze of the locals, I felt a prickle of fear crawling up my spine. Every patron in the diner had stopped mid-bite or mid-conversation to stare. The room was packed. Far more people than a town of maybe 200 should have, it seemed. The air was thick with the smell of fried food and something else, something metallic that made me uneasy. I forced a polite smile and stammered, "Just looking to eat." No one answered. Chairs squeaked as a few people slowly rose to their feet. My eyes darted around. Some faces looked angry, others just blank and eerie. The old woman with the 2 eye patches tilted her head as if listening, a thin grin curling her lips. My friend tugged on my jacket, whispering, "Let's go." He's not easily spooked, but I saw real fear in his eyes. The silence in the diner stretched on, unbearable. Just then, a man at the counter stood up. He was tall and gaunt, wearing a grease-stained apron, possibly the cook. In his hand glinted a long kitchen knife. My stomach flipped. Were we in danger for simply walking in? "We're closed," the man said flatly. His voice was cold and hollow, but the neon open sign was still flickering in the window behind us. No one moved or looked away. It felt like we'd stepped into a predator's den. Without another word, I nodded and backed up, bumping into my friend as we both hurriedly turned to leave. As soon as we stepped backward out of the door, the din of conversation resumed behind us, sudden and loud, like someone unpaused a television. Laughter, clinking silverware, chatting all of it back to normal, as if nothing had happened. It was even more jarring than the silence. We stumbled off the wooden porch and into the night. The single street of the town was still empty. I glanced over my shoulder through the diner's front window. To my shock, every head inside was still turned toward the door, toward us, though people were talking and moving again. It was utterly surreal. They were eating and conversing, but their eyes were all watching us leave. "Drive, now," my friend hissed. The hairs on my neck were standing up. We jogged to my car, parked under a lone, flickering street lamp. I fumbled the keys with trembling fingers. As the engine sputtered to life, the diner's front door swung open. That old woman with the eye patches stepped out onto the porch, flanked by 2 large men from inside. They just stood there, silhouettes in the diner's neon glow, watching. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I slammed the car into reverse, then tore out of the gravel parking lot without even fully shutting my door. Pebbles pinged against the undercarriage as we sped down the empty main street. In the rearview mirror, I could see the old woman's figure, perfectly still except for her head slowly turning to follow our departing car. We blasted out of that town and didn't slow down for half an hour. My friend kept twisting around to check if we were being followed. Thankfully, no headlights appeared behind us in the darkness. Only then did I begin to calm down enough to speak. "What the hell was that?" I mumbled, hands shaking on the wheel. Neither of us had an answer. Later that night, safely on the interstate, we pulled into a busy truck stop diner to finally eat. Under the bright fluorescent lights, surrounded by other travelers, we started to feel a little safer. We cautiously joked about our bizarre encounter, trying to convince ourselves it was just some crazy small-town welcome. But deep down, we were truly rattled. Out of curiosity, I asked a waitress at the truck stop if she'd ever heard of the little town we wandered into. Her cheerful face changed the moment I mentioned the name. She nodded grimly and said, "You're lucky. A few folks went missing near there over the years. State police never proved anything, but I'd stay far away." My blood ran cold. I never told her what we saw, but her words confirmed our gut feeling that something was very wrong in that place. We left immediately, not even finishing our pie. To this day, I cannot drive lonely backroads without remembering those townspeople's dead, unblinking stares. I still see that eyeless old woman in my nightmares, and I hear her raspy voice echoing, "What do you want here?" I'm not sure what would have happened if we'd stayed to find out. I'm just grateful we got away, and I have no desire to ever learn what secret that silent diner was hiding. I jerked the steering wheel in alarm as a line of dark figures emerged from the shadows and stepped onto the road. In the weak glow of my pickup's headlights, I counted them 6 no more. One by one, they formed a human barricade across the narrow country road, shoulder to shoulder. I slammed the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt on the cracked pavement. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized we were cornered by at least 12 men blocking our way. They appeared from nowhere, and now they stood facing us, motionless. It was past midnight on an isolated back road in rural Louisiana. I was 19, with my buddy riding shotgun. We'd spent the day exploring random dirt roads and forgotten highways for fun, testing out shortcuts between small towns. We were miles from anywhere, just swamps and forest around. The night had been moonless and oppressively quiet until now. My friend and I stared through the windshield at the line of men ahead. None of them moved an inch. Their faces were lost in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on us. A cold dread crept over me. These guys had literally materialized out of the darkness. One moment the road was clear, the next they were just there. I flicked on my high beams. In the blinding light, the figures didn't flinch. Now I could see they were all dressed in rough work clothes, stained flannels, overalls, a couple shirtless despite the chill. Some held objects in their hands. I caught the glint of a metal pipe, a length of chain, maybe a knife. My pulse pounded in my ears. This had to be a trap. We'd heard stories of backwoods, troubled travelers robbed, or worse, after taking a wrong turn. I had the sinking feeling we'd just found that trouble. "What do we do?" my friend whispered, voice quavering. There was no cell signal out here to call for help. The men were still about 50 feet ahead. Behind us, the road stretched back into darkness. For all I knew, more might be creeping up from behind. One of the men stepped forward from the line, his boots crunching on gravel. He raised his arms slowly and pointed directly at us. Whether it was a beckoning motion or a warning, I wasn't sure. My blood ran cold. Instinct screamed at me that if we stopped here, we might not come out alive. I made a split-second decision. "Hang on," I barked at my friend. I threw the truck into reverse first, letting it roll back a few yards to give me a running start. The men up ahead watched, still eerily calm. Then I shifted into first gear and floored the accelerator. The engine roared and the pickup lunged forward, tires squealing on the worn asphalt. The line of men held their ground far longer than I expected. For a terrifying couple of seconds, it looked like they intended to let us plow right into them. My friend screamed, "They're not moving." I gripped my teeth and kept my foot down. At the last possible moment, the group split apart. They sidestepped just enough for my truck to barrel through the gap, missing them by inches. I caught a flash of faces as we shot past, expressionless, cold eyes tracking us. One man slammed his fist on the side of the truck bed with a loud bang. Another hurled something. A glass bottle shattered against the tailgate. "Go, go, go," my friend yelled, as if I needed any encouragement. I sped onward down the road, not daring to slow. In the mirror, I saw the figures casually regrouping, stepping back into the roadway behind us. They weren't running or chasing. They simply stood there, watching our red taillights fade. My hands were shaking on the wheel, adrenaline making my whole body tremble. The narrow road twisted through the dark woods, and I took the curves far too fast. I kept expecting to see headlights flare up behind me, or perhaps another blockade around the next bend. We drove in tense silence for several minutes, hearts pounding, until the road finally merged onto a larger two-lane highway. I didn't stop. Only once we were safely 20 miles away, passing a lone gas station, did I pull over. Under the fluorescent lights of the empty station lot, the reality of what happened hit us. We inspected the truck, a dent in the rear fender, some scratched paint evidence that it wasn't just a nightmare. There was also a smeared handprint in what looked like mud or blood, on the tailgate that hadn't been there before. I shuddered, imagining the man who had hit the truck. We notified the local sheriff the next day, more out of duty than expectation. Predictably, nothing came of it. "Probably some kids messing around," the deputy said dismissively over the phone. But I could hear an unease in his voice. Maybe this wasn't the first report of such an incident. In the weeks after, I scoured local news, half expecting to hear about a missing traveler or a gang of highwaymen. Nothing, just a few murmurs. Online about strange happenings in isolated parts of the parish. Some people in nearby towns whispered about a local family reputed to be redneck mafia or a generational cult that didn't take kindly to outsiders. We never learned the truth. All I know is that on that night, in the middle of nowhere, a dozen shadowy figures tried to make us stop on a dark road. And whatever their intentions, they weren't good. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if ID hit the brakes instead of the gas. Would we have been robbed, kidnapped, worse? I get chills thinking about those silent men and their cold stares as they parted for our truck at the last second. Now, every time I drive down a lonely country road at night, I keep my doors locked and my eyes on the shadows. I learned that in some small towns, the darkness itself might be laying a trap, and if you're smart, you don't stick around to find out why. We rolled to a stop in the middle of Main Street, our motorcycle engines rumbling into the otherwise dead silence. An entire small town lay sprawled before us, but not a single living soul in sight. Boarded up shops, rusting cars from decades past, paint peeling off clapboard walls. It was as if we had stumbled into a long-forgotten time capsule. But the eeriest part was the figures. At first glance, I thought people were standing along the street, watching us. I nearly waved, relieved to see life, but then I realized I was waving at sculptures. Dozens of life-sized human shapes occupied the sidewalks and porches. Some were welded from scrap metal, twisted into uncanny approximations of people, mid-stride or sitting on benches. Others were stuffed figures, like scarecrows, dressed in rotted flannel and denim. A few were just crude silhouettes cut out of sheet metal, bolted to walls or signposts. All of them were positioned as if going about a normal day in this deserted town. A metal woman in a sun hat stood outside a grocery. A faceless scarecrow family sat at a bus stop. Each was frozen in time, their eyeless faces pointed out toward the street toward us. "This place is wild," my friend Jack murmured, shutting off his bike. There were 4 of us on a cross-country motorcycle trip, deliberately taking the long backroads to avoid attention and cops, if we're honest. We hadn't intended to find a ghost town, yet here we were, deep in some forgotten pocket of Arizona or New Mexico desert. The afternoon sun was brutal, and after hours of riding, we were desperate for a break. An old wooden sign at the town's edge had welcomed us to prosperity, an ironic name, given the state of the place. As we dismounted and removed our helmets, the oppressive quiet set in. No wind, no birds, nothing but the creak of a nearby sign and the ping of our bike engines cooling. We approached the nearest sculpture, a metal cowboy tipping his hat. A layer of orange rust flaked off at a touch. It was equal parts impressive folk art and unsettling, like stumbling into a post-apocalyptic art installation. We wandered further down Main Street, boots crunching on cracked asphalt. Our voices sounded small, swallowed by the emptiness. Faded posters in shop windows advertised a county fair in 1985. A pang of sadness hit me. An entire community had died here, but who had made the figures, and why? "Guys, check this out," Jack called. In the center of the street, in what once might have been a little plaza, stood a cluster of sculptures arranged almost like a gathering. 5 or 6 figures formed a circle. As we walked around them, I felt a chill despite the heat. These ones were different, not just townsfolk poses. One figure was on its knees, head bent. Surrounding it were 3 others holding what looked like long rods or weapons. Another stood off to the side, arms raised to the sky. The tableau looked ritualistic, like some execution or bizarre ceremony frozen in metal and straw. A sense of unease nagged at me. "Maybe we should get going," I said under my breath. The others were equally spooked, but trying to play it cool. We agreed to at least find some shade and drink water before moving on. The only open building we found was the old gas station. Its front door hung open, drifting slowly in the faint breeze our movements stirred up. Inside, shelves were mostly bare, coated in dust. Sunlight filtered through grime-caked windows, illuminating motes of dust in the air. We found a couple of chairs in the back office and sank into them gratefully, chugging from our water bottles. Jack ventured further inside, hoping maybe for a forgotten vending machine. I stayed by the doorway, gazing out at the silent street. The motionless figures out there almost tricked my eyes into seeing movement. Heat haze made them wobble in my vision. I tried to convince myself that's all it was when I did see one move. My heart skipped a beat. A hunched man by a lamppost seemed to twitch. I blinked and stepped onto the porch for a better look. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from inside the store behind me. I whirled around as Jack came running back, face pale, swearing he'd seen something in there. Without hesitating, we all decided we'd overstayed our welcome in prosperity. We hurried to our bikes. As I strapped on my helmet, I scanned the sculptures one last time. That S, when I spotted it. One figure in the circle, the one that had been kneeling, was now toppled over on its side. None of us had touched it. "Go, go," I urged the others, adrenaline surging. Engines roared to life, and we sped off the way we came. As we passed the old bus stop family, I could veer sworn one of the straw-stuffed children had its head turned slightly more our way than before. I refused to look back after that. We left prosperity in a cloud of dust. A few miles down the road, we finally pulled over to gather our wits. Jack confessed that in the back room he found a cot and canned food signs. Someone was squatting there, and he thought he heard a door slam as if a person slipped out the back. Perhaps the sculptor still lingered, silently watching his guests. The crash we heard might have been him knocking something over in escape. Thinking of a hidden stranger observing us in that ghost town sent shivers through all of us. We never found out who he was or what he was doing. Some of those sculptures seemed designed to scare or to send a message. But to whom? When I think of prosperity now, I don't just remember the unsettling artwork or the ghostly quiet. I remember the feeling of being watched in that deserted place. Whether it was by the mysterious artist or something else, I can't say. All I know is that what initially felt like a quirky roadside attraction quickly turned into one of the most unnerving experiences of my life. Now, whenever I see one of those cute world's largest ball of twine type road signs, I hesitate. Because sometimes the attractions that small towns offer are better left unseen. The headlights hit something unexpected in the darkness ahead, a tangle of shapes swaying between the trees. I slowed the car to a crawl, and my friends and I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. What we saw made my blood run cold. Dozens of objects dangled from the branches, arching over the dirt road, slowly twisting and turning. As we inched closer, the shapes came into focus. There were knives, rusted machetes, and blades of all kinds hanging by twine. And mingled among them were dolls, or rather dismembered doll parts. Plastic limbs and eyeless heads spun lazily, catching our headlights in brief flashes. It looked like some depraved Christmas tree farm from hell. Hell no, my friend Sarah said from the back seat, breaking the stunned silence. We were a group of 4 college kids who had grown up in the next county over. With nothing better to do on a summer night, we decided to drive the backroads and maybe cross the state line just to say we did. Out here, on the border between our state and the next, the countryside was mostly dense forest and old logging trails. We'd never been down this particular road before, and now I wished fervently we never had. I brought the car to a stop. The narrow dirt path was completely draped by the canopy of gnarled oak trees. Hanging from nearly every reachable branch were those bizarre ornaments. There were more than just knives and dolls, too. I spotted a rusty handsaw, a bleached white cow skull, even a noose swinging empty and creaking softly. A chill crept over me despite the muggy night air. Who would do this? Murmured Kevin, my best friend, from the passenger seat. None of us answered. Our little adventure suddenly felt like stumbling into someone's twisted secret. We debated what to do in frantic whispers. The road was too narrow to easily turn around, especially in the dark with trees close on either side. We'd have to either back out slowly for a mile or keep going forward until we could find a clearing to turn. Forward deeper under those hanging horrors. Just drive. Let's get out of here, Sarah urged. She sounded on the verge of panic. My heart was thudding, but I nodded and eased the car forward very slowly, ducking instinctively as we passed under a massive machete dangling point down. The car's headlights illuminated more and more of the disturbing decorations. Dirt-caked stuffed animals with missing eyes. Shards of mirrors that reflected our own headlights back at us, casting moving shadows. As we crept onward, the forest seemed to swallow us. The overhanging branches knitted together, blocking out the moon and leaving only our twin beams of light. Everyone had gone quiet, eyes darting from tree to tree. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It felt as if the forest itself had eyes. Half a mile in, we came upon something that made me stop again with a jolt. On the right side of the road stood a crooked wooden cross planted in the ground. Hanging from its arms were dozens of pairs of shoes, old boots, sneakers, even baby shoes, all dangling by their laces. Many were stained dark. Whether it was old blood or just mud and rot, I couldn't tell. Beneath the cross, arranged neatly in a row, were glass jars containing isque, uinted ... Looked like animal organs. Wet, dark lumps floating in cloudy fluid. "Go, please," Sarah pleaded, almost sobbing now. Suddenly, a sharp clang echoed through the night, startling all of us. It sounded like metal striking metal from somewhere not far ahead. I killed the headlights immediately, plunging us into darkness. We sat, frozen, listening, my ears strained. For a moment, only the chorus of crickets and Sarah's soft sobs. Then, another sound, a faint crunch of footsteps on dry leaves, off to the left of the road. That was enough. I threw the car into reverse, thank God for modern rear cameras, and I started backing up as fast as I dared. The engine revved louder than I wanted, and I saw the glow of someone or something flickering between the trees behind us. When I briefly flicked the lights on to navigate, there was definitely movement out there. As I reversed down the winding path, the hanging dolls and blades swung wildly in our wake, clinking and scraping against the roof. It sounded like the forest was alive and furious at our intrusion. Kevin kept muttering, oh God," under his breath. In the back, Sarah was crying, and our other friend, Jamal, was whispering a prayer. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I saw a gap in the trees and the blessed open sky beyond. We burst out of that tunnel of trees back onto the gravel county route we'd originally been on. I didn't stop. I gunned it down the road, dirt spraying, until we were a good few miles away. Only then did I pull over at an old closed gas station where the county road met the highway. Under the sickly yellow security light, we all sat in stunned silence, trying to process what we'd seen. I realized my hands were trembling violently on the wheel. We all agreed there was something back there, whether it was a deranged individual or a group doing who knows what. Why decorate the trees like that? Was it a warning? A threat? Or part of some ritual? We had no intention of finding out. Kevin wanted to call the cops, but out here the jurisdiction was murky, and frankly, we worried about going back or leading anyone else out there in the dark. In the end, we told a local sheriff's deputy the next day. He looked disturbed, but not exactly surprised, saying he'd check it out. We never heard more. None of us ever drove near that state line at night again. For months, I had nightmares of swaying silhouettes in the trees and the soft clinking of metal in the breeze. To this day, I can look at a child doll or a hanging ornament without my stomach turning. There are places deep in the backroads of this country that are claimed by darkness, where something or someone cruel leaves their mark. We were lucky that night to recognize we had wandered somewhere we clearly did not belong, and lucky that we got out alive. Before whoever was out there decided we might make the next grisly decoration on the hanging tree. We almost didn't notice the town at first. The only sign of it was a cluster of rooftops visible through the autumn bat. Trees as we drove down a lonely two-lane road in eastern Kansas. It was a Saturday afternoon in late 2001, and my wife and I were taking our two babies on one of our aimless drives, a cheap way to soothe fussy infants and entertain ourselves when money was tight. We often wandered the rural backroads near Fort Riley, but this place was new to us. Curious, I turned down a gravel lane that led toward the tiny collection of houses. There couldn't have been more than a dozen homes laid out in a simple grid, plus a larger building at one end that looked like an old schoolhouse or community center. As we rolled slowly into the heart of the little town, an unsettling vibe washed over me. Despite it being a clear day and not yet evening, there was not a single person outside. No kids playing, no one mowing a lawn or sitting on a porch, nothing. The homes themselves seemed well kept enough at first glance, but something was off. Then I noticed it. Many front doors were slightly ajar, and as we approached, I saw one door swing shut as if caught by a breeze. Except there was no breeze that day. My wife must have noticed it too, because she squeezed my arm. "Where is everyone?" she whispered. I slowed our car to a crawl, peering around. Curtains fluttered in a couple of windows. Movement, I was sure I saw movement inside one house. Maybe they saw us coming and hid. It didn't make sense. We were just a family out for a drive. Not even strangers really, just from a few towns over. I decided to park near the old school building, which sat at the end of the only street. It was a brick structure with boarded up windows, clearly long abandoned. Charred black streaks climbed one wall up to the sagging roof. It had suffered a fire, perhaps years ago. A small, rusted playground sat beside it, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt where a merry-go-round stood still. As I stepped out of the car, the hairs on my arms rose. I realized then what was truly bothering me. The absolute silence. Not just the absence of people, no birds, no distant tractor hum, nothing. My wife, uneasy, told me under her breath, "Don't go far." I nodded and took a few steps down the street, cradling my toddler son against my shoulder while he slept. At that moment, from the nearest house on the right, I caught a sudden flicker of motion. I glanced over to see a curtain drop quickly, as if someone had been watching and ducked away. In the house next to it, I heard the faint clack of blinds being drawn shut. Then, to my left, a door that had been ajar abruptly slammed closed. The sharp bang echoed, making me jump. My wife gasped, now holding our other child tightly. It was like a ripple of activity. House after house, as far as I could see down the street, doors were shutting, window blinds sliding down. One after another, bang, bang, bang. Not a single person stepped outside or showed. Their face only the sounds and quick movements behind the veil of the suddenly sealed up homes. Within half a minute, the little town had effectively shut itself in. My heart hammered. Were we so unwelcome that our mere presence caused this? "I think we should go," I said quietly. My wife was already easing into the driver's seat, not even bothering to buckle the squirming baby in her arms just yet. I jumped back in the passenger side, holding our son tightly, and she hit the gas before I even had the door fully closed. As we hurried back down the gravel lane, I looked back. In one second-story window of the last house, I glimpsed a face peering out from behind a curtain. A pale oval, eyes I couldn't make out, but I felt the intensity of their stare. Then it was gone, the curtain snapping shut. We drove in tense silence until we were a few miles away. The babies, thankfully, remained asleep. My wife and I exchanged baffled, uneasy looks. What on earth had we stumbled into? Back home that evening, I couldn't shake the experience. Why would an entire community hide from us? It felt like we had driven into a ghost town and somehow woken the spirits of its residents, who retreated at the sight of living outsiders. Or perhaps the people there were victims of something fear, paranoia. Over the next week, I did some quiet digging. The place was so small it barely had a name on the map, just a dot. But I eventually learned that the old schoolhouse had caught fire in the late 1980s during a fall festival, tragically killing several children and a teacher. The town never recovered. Many moved away. Those who remained became reclusive, distrusting any outsiders. Some whispers online even suggested the fire wasn't an accident, hinting at a cover-up or occult involvement, though nothing was proven. Whether those rumors held any truth or not, one thing was clear. The residents of that town wanted nothing to do with anyone beyond their borders. We represented the outside world, and they shut us out in an instant, maybe out of grief or guilt, or a deeper secret we'll never know. I have never gone back, and I have no intention to. The image of those doors slamming and curtains closing in unison still gives me chills. It felt less like hostility and more like fear. But whether they were afraid of us or of something else lurking in that quiet place, I'll never find out. Some small towns guard their mysteries fiercely, and if you happen to blunder in, they'll ensure you leave none the wiser, just as we did, haunted by questions and the oppressive silence of a town that seemingly vanished at our arrival. It was supposed to be a fun detour to a famous ghost town. My friends and I were road tripping through Pennsylvania, and we wanted to swing by Centralia, the near-deserted mining town, where an underground fire has been burning for decades. But in the dense, wooded hills leading up to Centralia, our GPS led us astray. We found ourselves on a rough gravel road snaking up a thickly forested mountain. The afternoon light was fading, and a low fog clung to the trees. As we rounded a bend, the road dead-ended in a small clearing. In the center of that clearing stood a stone well, or maybe a memorial of some sort. We got out of the car to inspect it. A metal plaque on a post next to the old stone well read, "In honor of the brave firemen of 19X. It seemed to be a commemorative site, perhaps for firefighters who battled the coal fire or some local tragedy. Odd place for it, I thought. But the area was neatly kept. Fresh flowers at the base, the grass recently trimmed. Someone clearly tended to it. As our eyes adjusted to the dim light, we began to notice other things around us. The clearing was bordered by tall pines and oaks, and from their branches hung objects. At first, I thought they were wind chimes or ribbons. But no, they were far stranger. One tree branch had an old sun-bleached teddy bear dangling by a cord around its neck, its button eyes missing. Another branch held a cluster of what looked like animal bones, wired together like macabre mobiles. Faded plastic flowers, the kind used for graves, were nailed to several trunks in odd patterns. And then there were the chairs, 3 wooden chairs, hoisted high in the tree limbs, arranged in a triangle formation above the clearing, as if an invisible audience watching us from above. A shiver crawled up my spine. "This isn't normal," my friend muttered. None of us disagreed. Off to one side of the clearing, partly hidden by underbrush, stood a tiny wooden cabin. It was dark inside, and no lights were visible, but smoke gently puffed from a metal pipe chimney, meaning someone was home. Yet we hadn't seen a single vehicle or person on our way up. Feeling like intruders, we decided to turn the car around immediately, but the clearing was tight, encircled by trees. I had to execute a multi-point turn. As I carefully reversed near the tree line, the car's headlights swept over the cabin and the forest beyond. And that when we saw him, a man stood about 20 yards into the woods, just at the edge of our headlights' reach. He was tall and thin, dressed in what looked like a dirty coverall. He wasn't moving, just standing very still between 2 trees. I wouldn't have even noticed him if the light had caught the shine of his eyes. He was watching us. My friend in the passenger seat sucked in a breath. "Go, just go," he whispered urgently. My heart thundered as I put the car in drive. But in my panic, the tires spun in the soft earth for a second, kicking up mud. The man in the woods took a step forward into the light. His face was gaunt, pale, with a huge grin that looked more like a grimace. In his hand, he held something long and thin, a rope or a wire. He raised it slowly, as if in greeting or warning. The tires caught traction and the car lurched forward. I sped out of the clearing the way we came, gravel pinging off the undercarriage. One of my friends was sobbing. Another was twisting around in his seat, watching out the rear window to make sure we weren't followed. I stole one quick glance in the mirror. For just an instant, I saw the clearing receding behind us, the dark outline of the man, now standing in the middle of the road where our car had been moments before, still watching, navigating that winding gravel path in near dark, with terror pumping through my veins, was one of the most nerve-wracking drives of my life. When we finally jolted back onto a paved road and found our way to a highway, we all finally exhaled. Safe under the neon glow of a gas station an hour later, we tried to make sense of what we saw. We reasoned that the site might have started as a legitimate memorial, but someone, maybe that man, maybe a group, had turned it into something else. A shrine of sorts. But for what? The hanging chairs, the bones, the bizarre decorations, it felt like a shrine to nightmares. Perhaps it was just a solitary hermit with a twisted sense of art. Or perhaps something more sinister. A place of rituals we dared not imagine. I later searched online for any information about that mountain or the memorial. Aside from a vague reference to an old volunteer fire station that burned down in the 60s, I found nothing. No mention of the shrine in the woods, or a recluse living up there. If locals knew, they kept it to themselves. What I do know is that on what was supposed to be a casual trip to a famous ghost town, we found something else entirely. We stumbled upon someone's secret domain, adorned with decaying toys and bones and silent watchers in the trees. And the way that man stared at us, I still see it in my nightmares, a grin that didn't reach his cold eyes. We intruded on his space, and I have no doubt he wanted us gone. Thankfully, we left before he decided to make us a permanent part of his ghastly forest shrine. I pushed open the swinging door and froze in my tracks. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. It was a saloon, or at least it looked like one, straight out of the Old West, complete with a long wooden bar and round poker tables. But the patrons, they weren't human. Dozens of life-sized dolls and dummies occupied almost every seat. There were at least 20 of them, raggedy figures propped up in chairs, slumped over the bar, or posed as if mid-conversation. Each was dressed in dusty Wild West attire, cowboy hats, frilly saloon girl dresses, sheriff's badges. Many had porcelain or plastic heads with painted eyes and frozen smiles. Others were scarecrow-like, just clothes stuffed with something lumpy. An old player piano in the corner tinkled out a tinny, off-key tune that echoed eerily in the otherwise silent room. It was 6 p.m., but in this little Colorado town, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains. My girlfriend and I were passing through on a road trip and had stopped at the only gas station, general store in town. It doubled as a liquor store, and as I paid for our drinks, I asked the grizzled clerk if there was a restroom I could use. He nodded and pointed to a door at the back, just past the coolers. "Through there," he said curtly. I followed his direction, pushing through a heavy door and stepped into this saloon scene. At first, I honestly thought a bunch of people were having some kind of costume party in near darkness. But the unnatural stillness of the figures and the dust-laden air told me otherwise. A single flickering oil lamp on the bar cast long shadows that danced among the motionless crowd of dolls. The smell of must and something like mothballs hit me. Cautiously, I took a few steps in. Wooden floorboards creaked under my boots. A saloon dummy wearing a bowler hat and garters, perhaps meant to be a madam, stared at me with glassy blue eyes. Someone had applied lipstick to her faded face. Another figure, a mustached bartender dummy, leaned on the bar with a permanent grin, an empty hand shaped as if it once held a mug. It was like I had stepped back in time and into a nightmare simultaneously. Behind me, the door suddenly thumped shut, making me jump. The noise seemed extraordinarily loud in the silent room, and to my rattled mind it felt like the dolls were all suddenly looking at me, though none actually moved. Of course, my heart hammered in my chest. "Hello," I called out softly, half expecting the clerk or someone to be in here, maintaining this bizarre display. No answer. The player piano continued plinking its ghostly melody. I noticed now that it was operating on one of those old paper music rolls. It must have been set on an automatic loop. The tune sounded familiar. Oh my darling, Clementine slowed and walked. I felt a strong urge to leave right that second, yet a morbid curiosity held me for a moment longer. I inched towards the bar, giving a wide berth to a table where 3 figures in cowboy gear sat frozen around a poker game. One had aces and eights fanned in its gloved hand. The dead man's hand, I thought with a shudder. Cobwebs stretched between some of the chairs, lightly quivering as I passed. On the bar itself, beside the bartender dummy, were several glass tumblers. Inside one was something dark and mummified, a shriveled object that I realized was a severed doll's head, staring up at me from the bottom of the glass. That was enough. I turned on my heel and hurried back to the door I'd come through, every instinct screaming to get out. The door was heavy and stuck a bit as I yanked it open, practically lunging back into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the gas station's back hallway. I nearly collided with the clerk, who was standing just outside, as if he'd been coming to check on me. "There's a bunch of dolls," I stammered, my voice high and shaky. The clerk's lined face didn't so much as twitch in surprise. He just nodded slowly. "Yup, old hobby of the owner. Folks around here call it the Dollhouse Saloon." He eyed my pale face and gave a slight smirk. "Creepy, ain't it? Bathrooms on the left, by the way." I realized with absurd relief that the dolls weren't dangerous, just incredibly disturbing. This was someone's collection or art project, albeit a very odd one. I muttered something about actually not needing the restroom anymore and quickly made my way back to the front of the store where my girlfriend waited. I hustled her out, muttering, "We're leaving. I'll explain in the car." As we drove out of that tiny town, I did explain, and she was creeped out just hearing about it. We joked nervously that at least the dolls didn't come to life or chase me or something. But in truth, the experience left me deeply unsettled. Who would build such a thing? And why hide it behind a gas station? Was it really just a hobby, or something more? The clerk's nonchalance suggested it was a local attraction of sorts, but we saw no signs advertising it. I can still picture the Dollhouse Saloon, clearly every figure frozen in eternal revelry, gathering dust in that dark room. It's the kind of scene that sticks in your mind and surfaces in nightmares. Sometimes I dream that I'm back there, alone among those lifeless partygoers, and in the dream, just for a split second, I catch one of them turning their head to look at me. I always wake up with a start, heart pounding. Real or not, I've had my fill of dolls for a lifetime, and I'm perfectly fine never stepping foot in that little town again. I crouched in the darkness behind a fallen log, struggling to control my breathing. My heart thundered in my chest as I peered into the clearing beyond. By the flickering orange glow of a bonfire, a circle of hooded figures swayed and chanted in eerie unison. I counted at least a dozen of them. This nightmare had begun less than an hour earlier. I was driving a lonely back road through northern Wyoming when my car ran out of gas. With no cell service and night closing in, I decided to walk back to a tiny village I'd passed a few miles behind. The forest was ink black and silent around me. After 20 minutes of trudging, I noticed a faint light deeper among the trees. Hoping for a house, I followed it quietly and stumbled upon this hidden ritual. The hooded group stood around a roaring fire, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. At their feet was a large flat stone like an altar. A man lay on it, tied down, struggling weakly. My stomach lurched. It looked like I was witnessing a human sacrifice or some gruesome ceremony. I must have made a noise, because suddenly the chanting stopped. A harsh foreign command echoed through the pines. All at once, the hooded figures turned their heads in my direction. My blood went cold. 2 of them broke from the circle and started striding toward the tree line. carrying torches. I didn't wait to see more. Keeping low, I slowly backed away until I felt I had some cover. Then I turned and ran as quietly as I could. Terror gave me wings, but the darkness made every step perilous. Behind me, I heard shouts. They knew someone was there, and they were coming. My only thought was to get back to the road. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted. Within a minute, I burst out onto the gravel road so fast that I nearly fell. A cone of light appeared to my right, headlights approaching. A vehicle. Without hesitation, I ran into the middle of the road, frantically waving my arms. The oncoming pickup truck screeched to a halt, its high beams flooding over me. The driver, a lone older man, looked as if he was about to shout at me for jumping in front of him. But when he saw my face and the desperation in my eyes, his expression changed to alarm. "Please, help me," I gasped, glancing over my shoulder. The trees behind me were dark, but I feared any second those torch-bearing figures would emerge. Something in my tone convinced him. He motioned me to get in. I clambered into the truck, babbling, "Drive, just go." He didn't need to be told twice. As soon as I yanked the door shut, he hit the gas. We sped down the gravel road. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed two distant lights bobbing out of the woods, torches on the road where I'd been moments ago. They grew smaller and smaller as we roared away into the safety of the night. Shaking and breathless, I told the driver about the ritual I'd witnessed. His face went pale. He said he'd heard rumors over the years of strange happenings in these hills. Pets disappearing, animal carcasses found in bizarre displays, bonfire chants echoing through the valleys. "Never thought I'd run into it for real," he muttered, gripping the wheel. He dropped me off in the next town, where I called for a tow and spent the night. I reported what I saw to the local sheriff in the morning, though I could tell from his tight-lipped nod that there was little he could do with my panicked story and vague location. To this day, I am haunted by that image of the bound man on the altar and those hooded silhouettes turning toward me. I don't know if they were truly going to kill him, or if it was some terrifying theater. I only know that in that moment, I was sure I'd be next if they caught me. I consider it nothing short of a miracle that a good Samaritan happened down that road at just the right time. Now, whenever I drive through remote woods at night, I think of that cult in the pines. The quiet, isolated places of this world sometimes hide the darkest secrets, and if you're unlucky enough to stumble upon them, pray that you can escape as I did, with nothing but nightmares as scars. The room stank of death. I noticed it the instant I stepped into room 6 of the roadside motel. A sickly sweet odor like rotting meat mixed with cheap floral air freshener. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. It was late. I was exhausted from driving all day through rural Missouri, and no other motels were open for miles. Against my better judgment, I decided to endure it for one night. The manager had mumbled something about the room being a little stuffy as he handed me the key. I figured an animal might have died in the wall or something. I propped the door and window open for a few minutes, but the smell only faded a little. Too tired to care further, I bolted the door, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the queen bed. I must have dozed off for a couple hours. Sometime past 2 a.m., I woke up feeling uneasy. The smell was still there, stronger than ever. Lying in the dark, I became aware of another sound beyond the hum of the old air conditioner. A faint rustling, like fabric dragging lightly against something. My heart thumped. I flicked on the bedside lamp. The room looked normal, ugly floral wallpaper, a scuffed dresser, my duffel bag on the chair. Nothing moved. I held my breath and listened. Scratch, scratch. It was coming from somewhere near the bed. Summoning courage, I got up and checked the bathroom empty. Aside from peeling linoleum and a dripping faucet, I checked the closet. Nothing but a busted vacuum cleaner. The room had no space under the bed. It sat on a solid wood frame, so I couldn't look there. Eventually, the noise stopped. Telling myself I must have imagined it, or perhaps a mouse in the walls. I double-checked that the door was locked, then lay back down. The next thing I remember is awakening to a nightmare sensation. The mattress seemed to shift beneath me, as if something had moved under it. I bolted upright, heart in my throat. In the silence, I heard a faint, rapid thump-thump from somewhere very close. It stopped after a couple of seconds. I was wide awake now, every nerve on edge. "Hello," I whispered into the darkness. Of course, no answer. After a few minutes of hearing nothing further, I convinced myself I was just spooked by the unfamiliar room and that awful smell. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep again, clutching my pocket knife under the pillow, just in case. Morning light revealed nothing out of the ordinary, except the odor seemed even worse. I couldn't stand it. I decided to complain to the manager, or get a different room to shower in. I packed up my things and went to the office. What happened next still chills me to the bone. When I grumbled about the smell in room 6, the manager sighed, like he'd been expecting this. He handed me a can of air freshener. "I'll spray it better. Sorry about that," he muttered. Not satisfied, I insisted something must be rotting in there. Maybe a dead animal. The manager paused, then reluctantly grabbed a set of keys. Together we returned to room 6. The smell hit us both anew when I opened the door. I watched as he checked behind the curtains and furniture. Finally, with a grunt of effort, he lifted the heavy mattress off the bed frame. I recoiled in horror. Stuffed inside the hollow wooden base of the bed was the decaying corpse of a man. His lifeless eyes stared upward, skin marbled green and black. He must have been in there for days. The manager screamed and stumbled back, nearly dropping the mattress on me. I stood there in shock, realizing the horror. I had slept just a few inches above a dead body all night. Within an hour, the place was crawling with police. I gave a statement, shaking from head to toe. The victim turned out to be a missing traveler who had likely been murdered. Judging by the state of the body, the police believed he'd been dead under that bed for nearly a week, hidden by the killer. Perhaps a previous occupant of the room or someone with access. I left as soon as I could, utterly traumatized. In the days following, 2 details gnawed at me and left me sleepless. One, the faint rustling and thumping I heard. At the time, I thought it was my imagination. But now, I wonder if the killer was actually hiding under the bed when I arrived, breathing or shifting, and I just didn't see them. Maybe my entrance scared them into staying put until I fell asleep, and they slipped out when I went to the office in the morning. The thought that a murderer might have been inches away while I slept obliviously is almost worse than the corpse itself. The second detail is that if I hadn't complained about the smell, who knows how long that poor soul would have remained there, undiscovered. I still have nightmares about lying in that motel bed, the dead man beneath me and perhaps his killer lurking just out of sight. I travel a lot for work, but since that incident, I thoroughly inspect every hotel and motel room I stay in. I look under beds, behind furniture, everywhere. Most small towns hide little charms or nothing at all, but this one hid a chilling secret in a roadside inn, and it taught me one thing. If a room smells like death, trust your nose and get the hell out. You might be closer to horror than you realize. I thought moving to a small town would be a welcome change of pace, a tight-knit community, friendly neighbors, a slower life. When I accepted a job offer in a remote little town in upstate New York, I was excited. The town had a population under 800, one main street, and more old maple trees than people. It seemed idyllic at first, but I was blissfully ignorant of the dark secret all the locals knew, a secret I almost paid for with my life. From the day I arrived, everyone was overly welcoming, almost too friendly. Neighbors brought pies, handshakes lingered a bit long, and I felt like a minor celebrity. As the new high school history teacher, I assumed the warmth was just small-town hospitality. My landlord, an affable middle-aged man named Carl, even refused my first month's rent, insisting we take care of our own here. I was touched, if a bit surprised, by the generosity. Weeks passed and I settled in, but I started noticing odd things. For one, people seemed to watch me. Not in a hostile way, but whenever I'd walk by, conversations would hush, and eyes would track me until I was gone. If I waved, they'd smile brightly and wave back, too quickly, like they'd been caught staring. There was also the matter of the locked building in the center of town. It was an old meeting hall or church, a white colonial-era structure with a tall steeple, clearly no longer used for Sunday service. I once asked the principal about it, and he changed the subject, saying, "Oh, just an old building we keep for historical purposes." I never saw anyone enter or exit, yet sometimes late at night I'd swear I saw a faint light in its attic window. One crisp October day, Carl invited me to join him and some friends for a weekend hunting trip in the woods. I'm no hunter, but not wanting to offend my new neighbors, I agreed. The whole week leading up to it, the town was abuzz. People I barely knew would pat my shoulder, saying, "Looking forward to this weekend," with knowing smiles. It struck me as odd that even folks not going on the trip seemed excited about it. Friday came, and a group of 10 of us drove out to an old lodge deep in the forest. It was a primitive place, no cell service, propane lights, a big stone hearth. That first night was jovial, grilling meat, drinking whiskey, lots of toasts to new friends. I felt happy and accepted, but beneath the friendliness, I sensed anticipation, like they were all waiting for something. I caught hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. There were subtle glances I didn't understand. Late that night, I stepped outside to get some fresh air and clear my head. The forest was moonlit and silent. As I wandered behind the lodge, I nearly tripped over something large on the ground. Regaining balance, I realized it was a crudely carved wooden mask, painted white, with antlers attached. It looked like something out of a pagan ritual. My heart kicked in my chest. I remembered many local farmhouses had deer antlers mounted above their doors. I'd assumed it was just country decor. Now a sick feeling crept over me. Before I could examine further, a voice spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't be poking around." I turned to see one of the townsmen, Dale, watching me from a few yards away. He'd been so friendly earlier, but now his eyes were cold. 2 other silhouettes stood behind him. I muttered something about getting air and hurried back inside. The party had quieted. Most of the men were seated around the hearth, not really talking, just waiting. I barely slept that night, dread gnawing at me. The next morning, the group decided to spread out in pairs to hunt. Carl insisted on partnering with me, which set me further on edge. We hiked for an hour and reached a small clearing. Suddenly, from the trees, a distant horn sounded a low, ancient note that made my skin crawl. Carl stiffened. "Wait here," he said, and stepped away as the horn sounded again, closer. "Carl, what is that?" I asked, voice shaking. He gave me an odd, apologetic look. "I'm real sorry," he whispered. Before I could react, he lunged and knocked the rifle out of my hands. I stumbled back, stunned. 2 figures emerged from the woods, Dale and another man, each holding one of those white antlered masks. I realized with horror they intended for me to wear it. Adrenaline surged and I bolted into the trees. Behind me, Carl shouted, "Stop him!" Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted through the forest. The horn blared again, and now shouts rang out to my left and right. They were trying to corral me. I barreled through a thicket and slid down a small ravine, scraping my arms. Distantly, I saw smoke from the lodge's chimney. I had circled back near the camp. Desperate, I veered toward the dirt road where the trucks were parked. If I could reach a vehicle bursting from the tree line, I spotted the trucks and a half-dozen townspeople standing guard. Some wore the horned wooden masks now, grotesque faces turned toward me. One held a coil of rope. They had been expecting this. A gunshot cracked the air, making me flinch. The masked group scattered for cover. I glanced back. Carl stood at the edge of the woods, rifle in hand, deliberately firing over our heads. "Go," he yelled at me. "Get out of here." He pumped the gun and swung it toward the others to keep them back. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted to the nearest truck. Keys were in the ignition, jumped in, and gunned it. Gravel flew as I roared down the path. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed the masked townsman converging on Carl, furious. He'd bought me just enough time. I didn't stop driving until I reached the highway and cell service. I called the state police and told them everything. By nightfall, authorities swarmed that town. In the old meeting hall, they found disturbing evidence of long-term cult activity, altars, ritual tools, even human remains from long ago. The townspeople had been hiding a generational cult that believed sacrificing outsiders would ensure prosperity. When the local economy faltered or crops failed, they'd lure a newcomer to appease whatever dark gods they worshipped. I had been marked as the next offering. Dozens of residents were arrested. A few ringleaders, including Dale, vanished into the woods and weren't immediately found. Carl survived, though he was beaten badly before law enforcement arrived. He later told me in the hospital that he couldn't let them harm me after getting to know me. He'd been raised in their twisted tradition, but his conscience won out at the crucial moment. He's the only reason I'm alive. Needless to say, I left that town immediately and never looked back. The friendly smiles, the warm welcome, all of it had been a lie, masking a horrific plan. I still have nightmares about those masked figures in the woods, and the moment I realized an entire town was in on a plot to kill me. If I learned anything, it's that sometimes a community's hospitality can hide a trap. Behind the quaint charm of some small towns, unspeakable secrets may lurk. I was lucky to escape with my life. Never again will I blindly trust a seemingly perfect small town, because you truly never know what darkness might be hiding behind all those friendly faces.